The following program is a WNYC production. New York Hotline is brought to you in part by NYNEX, a worldwide leader in telecommunications, delivering voice, data, image, and video communications to millions of people every day. And by Network MCI Business, the first total package of online, video conferencing, and messaging services for American business. Network MCI Business, installing the 21st century in offices today.
People should not have the rights to own handguns.
All citizens under the law have a right to protect themselves.
Would we be safer with more gun control or more guns? Good evening and welcome to New York Hotline. I'm Brian Lehrer. We just passed the 10th anniversary of the Bernard Goetz shooting, and New York is still divided over the case and still divided over the question of when self-defense turns into vigilantism. New York City has the toughest gun control laws in the country, and yet we have among the highest rates of gun-related crimes. Is gun control working in New York City? Might we actually be safer if more law-abiding citizens carried guns for self-defense? That's what Roy Innis thinks. He's the chairman of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. He's also a member of the National Board of Directors of the National Rifle Association, an organization dedicated to lobbying against stricter gun control laws. Richard Aborn wants stricter gun control. He is president of the Center to Prevent Handgun Violence and also president of Handgun Control, Inc. Mr. Aborn was an assistant district attorney in Manhattan for 5 years. Tonight we'll talk about gun control and self-defense with our two guests, and we'll take your phone calls, faxes, and email messages. We'll hear from the New York Hotline Citizens panel of video callers on desktop video from all over New York, and later in the hour we'll have our New York Hotline viewers poll. Roy, Richard, thank you very much for being with us tonight. Good evening. Roy Innis, it's been 10 years since the Bernard Goetz incident. Is New York a safer place today because of Bernard Goetz?
It is not, and it's not safe because of Bernard Goetz, because we have very regressive gun laws and gun administrative procedures in New York. Citizens are not allowed to defend themselves. Consequently, criminals are more bold, more audacious, and contemptuous of the public.
Well, you're a proponent of bearing arms for self-defense. Is it your position that if more people carried guns, maybe if more people confronted their attackers, as Bernie Goetz did, that New York would in fact be a safer place?
We cannot argue that immediately after Bernard Goetz defended himself in the subway, that subway crime dropped precipitously. And we cannot ignore the fact that once Bernard Goetz was brought before the second grand jury and indicted, that subway crime went right back up. Now, we have to look at that. We have to look at also parts of the country where people are allowed to protect themselves and carry arms, that there has been a dramatic drop in murder rates and assault rates and robbery rates.
Give me an example.
Florida, a perfect example. Since 1987, when a concealed carry law was passed in Florida, to the present.
Concealed carry law, that means you can carry a concealed weapon.
Right.
You can get a license to do that as a law-abiding citizen.
Exactly. Now, the criminals know that. Consequently, the criminals are more respectful of citizens. You will notice that a lot of the increase in crime, or the areas of increase in crime in Miami, for instance, was against tourists. Tourists cannot qualify for the concealed carry law. So the criminals knew that tourists were a softer and easier target than the ordinary Floridian.
Richard, is there a lesson in that?
No. Well, if you want to look at the data more closely, you realize the lesson is carrying concealed weapon permit laws do nothing to affect crime. In the 3 years after Florida passed its CCW law, the rate of crime, the rate of homicide, in fact, climbed every single year. It wasn't until 1991 when they passed a background and waiting check bill that the rate of crime and the rate of homicide actually began to drop. Florida now experiences a much higher violent crime rate than almost any other state in the country, and in fact is far higher than New York City's. You know, the data may be met with skepticism, but the data indicates that life in New York is in fact becoming safer. Is it a result of gun control laws? I don't know. It's a result of a variety of factors, I think primarily amongst which are good policing mechanisms. But to somehow mix the notion that gun control and carrying guns are mutually exclusive, I think is also wrong. They are very separate debates. There is a debate about whether or not guns make us safer, and I'm more than happy to discuss that, but there's a second and unrelated debate about whether or not we should pass gun control laws.
And in fact, we're going to have both of those debates as the hour goes on here tonight. But on that first one, how do you deal with the history of the fact that subway crime went way down after Bernie Goetz, and as soon as he was indicted, it went way back up?
Yeah,
Maybe a few well-placed incidents every month or every year are going to scare away the criminals because they're going to think crime is a high-risk enterprise in New York.
Yeah, I mean, there is no statistical significance to the fact that crime dropped in the 10 or 15 days or the 30 days after the Goetz incident. You cannot link that drop back to Goetz. I mean, I'm sure if you were to track rates of crime over a 10-year period, you would see lots of 30-day rises and falls. It's just statistically not significant. But the fundamental question is, should everybody in the city be carrying guns? I think that's a prescription for disaster. There is no data that indicates that carrying guns make us safer. The empirical data, the nationwide data, in fact, makes it crystal clear that we are more at risk by carrying guns.
Now, Richard and I have never agreed in statistics. I have some very hard statistics here from FBI Uniform Crime Report. The national drop, in fact, there's a national rise in crime of 12% over this period of the Florida concealed carry law, 87 to now. There was a 21% reduction in murders in Florida.
From when to
there
when?
was
From when to when?
From 87 to 94.
Right, but tell us about 87,
but
88, 89, and 90 when it went up.
I'm saying I'm comparing Florida against the national. And that's a fair comparison, right?
But his point is, in the second half of that, there was a stricter gun control law than there had been.
That had a direct impact on that.
But there was no attempt to encumber the average citizen. The concealed carry law that is missing in New York City, for instance, missing in Washington, D.C., for instance, was still and is still enforced in Florida. And we can't ignore the fact that with 250,000 concealed permits issued without any harassment from government, easy issuing, that there have been few examples. There have been no shootouts. There have been no gunfights at the OK Corral in Florida. And there have been very few examples where a legitimate person with legally carrying among the 250,000 have been using these weapons illegally to injure or harass or to murder citizens.
We're going to come back to this discussion in a minute, and I'm also going to want to ask you, Roy, why you're the head of a civil rights organization and the NRA. You think they're very compatible, but we want to hear from you tonight by phone, by fax, and by email. Do you own a gun? Do you think it makes you safer? Do you think gun control is working in New York with our strict gun control laws? Call us at 212-669-2222. Send us email on CompuServe or send a fax. Get in touch and be a part of New York Hotline. And let's go out to tonight's first citizens panelist in Staten Island. It is Jerry from Rosebank. Good evening, Jerry. And I understand that you're a hunter and you own a hunting rifle. How'd you get into hunting?
Well, many, many years ago, friends of mine asked me to go hunting with them, and I liked it so much. It's a great opportunity to get into the woods and smell the fresh air and enjoy the sport of hunting.
Process of getting a license, was it difficult?
I don't think it's difficult, but I think it is appropriate here in New York City. And that is, you either go to One Police Plaza or go to Queens Boulevard out in Queens, 120 Queens Boulevard, and you present them with a utility bill, you present them with your birth certificate, with pictures of yourself, you get fingerprinted, and you pay a fee to have this process take place. And within 12 to 16 weeks, if you are cleared by both the FBI as well as the New York City Police Department, you then will receive a license so that you then can go and purchase a rifle.
Do you foresee any scenario under which you might wind up using your hunting rifle for self-defense?
Well, it's always possible, Brian. Remember, every man can defend his family and his house within his house. And I think it is possible that if there was an intruder and I felt that the lives of my family and myself were in danger, I wouldn't hesitate a moment to take that rifle and use it. I would like to respond, if I may, Brian, to comments made by Roy as well as the gentleman with him. And by the way, I think I do feel very comfortable with the things that Roy is saying. And that is, there are thousands upon thousands, if not tens of thousands of people in New York City legitimately either carrying a gun, having a target permit, or owning rifles. And I think if we look at all of the legitimate guns that are out on the street and the numbers of crimes committed with those guns versus the illegal weapons, I think clearly the information will speak for itself. And that is, people that are conscientious, that are trained, that are licensed, are not likely. Will there be a risk? Yes. Will there be a likely effort to use it? I believe not.
Richard, how do you respond? Talk to Jerry.
Jerry, I don't dispute that. In fact, I started to say before Brian went to you, that this hasn't been the great Armageddon that many people feared. And in fact, Roy is right. In Florida, there hasn't been these horrible shootouts that we expected. But the issue is, does carrying a gun on the street, not just having a gun in the home, does carrying a gun on the street make us all safer? And I think the answer is no. And I think the data is pretty clear about that. But I don't want to confuse this issue with our efforts to get gun control laws in place. We seek very active systems nationwide of licensing and registration, a limitation on the number of guns that you can buy at any one time to one gun a month. Do you know that under current federal law, you can go in a gun shop and buy as many guns as you like? You can buy 100 357s anywhere in the country. We seek mandatory safety training. We would like safety mechanisms built into guns so that only the authorized user can fire the gun, actual mechanical devices, and things of that nature. That is not an effort to keep everybody from getting a gun. It's an effort to keep, quote, the bad guys from getting guns.
Jerry, what do you think about that? Maybe handgun control and owning a gun for self-defense are not mutually exclusive or even incompatible?
Well, I don't know. I have reservations. There are really two major arguments that I think we've got to consider here, Brian. One has to do with the ability of an individual to protect himself. The other has to do with constitutional law. And the third just simply has to do with the fact that we are a society and we're compressed into a very, very small area. I'm still going to join Roy and plead the case that having a gun either concealed on the person walking in the street or having a rifle in the woods and perhaps using it in the home does not constitute a danger. And I think when a level of protection is necessary, when you look at a community, particularly the urban cities throughout the United States, where 1 out of every 5 children are carrying a gun, 37% of our children say that they can easily get guns when they want them. 12% of our children carry guns to school, or rather weapons to school, every single day. There's a problem with society. But this problem, again, has nothing to do with the legitimate gun owner and gun user. It has to do with the problems within society, and I think that's where we've got to divide the issue.
Key point, Richard. You know,
But Roy, you don't have any problem with the fact that, as he said, you can go into a store and buy 100 357s, and that's okay?
You see, again, it's the wrong focus. We should be focusing on protection of citizens, the protection of decent people. If we have that focus, then we will see how many of these gun laws interfere with that process.
And that isn't a way to do it? Why not have each individual have to go in and buy his or her own gun if we're going to go that route?
Once we can agree on the sacredness of the right of self-defense, the sacredness of the fact that the right of self-defense is a civil right, a natural right, a human right.
Do you disagree with that?
Who disagrees?